Neuroconciencia, de Fundación AISSE. Con Juan Anaya.
Welcome to the 45th chapter of the AISSE Foundation podcast. I don't know if you have noticed something strange, but I'm trying to speak in English. Today is a very special day because we have several wonderful guests, and I think this experience can be very interesting and, why not, fun. So I want to start, as always, by thanking all the people who support us, who follow us every week. We already have more than 2,000 monthly playbacks, and our community doesn't stop growing. So thank you very much. And now comes the million-dollar question. Why am I here speaking like a fool? Let me try to explain it. Some weeks ago, I had the pleasure of recording an episode about the review of a meta-analysis published by Te Velde and colleagues. You already know the title, Neurodevelopmental Therapy for Cerebral Palsy, a meta-analysis. The conclusions of this work were as interesting as the implementation of NDT in CP is required. In the episode, we have the intervention of Lourdes Macías, honorary president of the Spanish Society of Pediatric Physiotherapy, who gave us a masterclass on the need to update our point of view as health professionals and abandon practices that are not based on scientific evidence. The chapter has been a success, the most listened in 2022, with more than 3,000 views in 5 weeks, and a lot of positive comments on social networks. So we wanted to go deeper into the subject and have a conversation with the person who better knows about the implications of the meta-analysis. As we discussed in the episode, NDT or Bobath Concept is the most frequent approach of treating children with cerebral palsy in Spain. So the bad reviews were not long in coming and complained about the study limitations. But in the end, the participants in the chapter are quite in agreement with Anna's conclusions, so we thought it would be great to talk to the author herself about these limitations. So I will introduce my guests this afternoon, Lourdes Macías and Elena Contel from the SEFIP, the Spanish Society of Pediatric Physiotherapy. I know Lourdes from the last episode, but it's a pleasure for me to meet you, Elena. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's quite an honor. I loved the previous episode. It was amazing, really powerful. So, about me, I'm a pediatric physiotherapist. I graduated in 2015 and got my master's in 2016 with Lourdes, actually. So she's like my mentor, and I'm always learning from her. Even nowadays, I keep learning every day, and it's an absolute pleasure to share this with her too. I now live in Glasgow, though I'm from Spain, and I work in a special needs school, but I'm also quite interested in everything in early intervention, especially when it comes to early mobility, like supported stepping devices, walkers, power mobility, and all that stuff. So, yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And Lourdes, how are you? I think that you liked the last episode. We have a lot of views, so thank you very much for the last episode. Thank you for being here tonight, because I think that it's going to be very, very interesting. So how are you?
Fine, Juan. Thank you very much for inviting me for this episode with Te Velde, that I'm excited to listen her about the thoughts, what the replies and the feedback he had from the meta-analysis, and it's an honor also to be here with her. Thank you.
Yes, because Anna is like our superwoman, because she has written what we thought and what we are trying to change here in Spain, because as Lourdes said, here in Spain, Bobath Concept or NDT, as we discuss later, is the most frequent approach to treat children with CP. And I think that there are a lot of things that could change, and we have to be updated. The newer generations should be informed and trying to get new ideas and not being like stuck in the past. And this is very important. And I think that the work that Anna has published is very important. Well, here in Spain is 10 p.m. Anna, I don't know if our brains will be able to work, but I think that our international guest deserves it. So, hi Anna, good evening, or better, good morning here, there in Australia. How are you? Thank you very much for being here. Tell us, our listeners, who you are, and why are you here?
Well, good morning and good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here and have this discussion with you today. It's already great to hear some of the things that you're saying today. So, yes, my name's Anna Te Velde. I'm a physiotherapist by training. I've been a physiotherapist for 18 years, and in the last 14 years, I've worked with children with cerebral palsy, both overseas in Bangladesh and in Australia at the Cerebral Palsy Alliance. And in the last 4 years, I've actually started to do some clinical work and some research work. So I've just finished my doctorate. Mm-hmm. I graduated 3 days ago, so it's very fresh. Thank you very much. So I'm both a clinician and now a new and learning researcher. So yes, it's very, very exciting to be here and talk to you about my work today.
Well, I don't know if you have ever been to Spain, but I have to tell you that your work is having a great impact here. So maybe it's a good idea to plan a little trip and visit Spain. I think it's not as far as it seems, maybe.
I love Spain. I have been to Spain. Yes, I have. I've been to, actually, many years ago, I walked the Camino de Santiago across Spain. So, that's a long time ago now, but, it's a beautiful country. That's for sure.
Okay. Well, but you always come back and take some beers with us and have a great time. Well, if you're ready, we can start the interview. I sent Anna some questions because, Anna, this is the first time that I interview someone in English, and I didn't want it to be a disaster. But I think if you agree, that is more interesting that each person can speak freely. It's more interesting that you can raise your hand or give me a sign when you want to say something. It would be wonderful if you, Anna, Lourdes, and Elena, could exchange your opinions and experiences as a specialist in physiotherapy in cerebral palsy, because I work with adults. I only have worked 6 or 7 years with children, and I'm not a big specialist in CP. So I think that you 3 women are the very, very, very big deal here, and I think that you have a lot of to share. Well, Anna, what were the topics you liked the most during your training? Have you been always so interested in neuroscience or in CP, or this was a discovery? Tell us something about how did you start studying CP, or why did you?
Yes.
Start?
Well, during university, I was always interested in pediatrics, and I worked very hard to do my honours in pediatrics, so that was always of interest to me. But actually at university, I found neurological physiotherapy quite difficult to understand, and I didn't even necessarily enjoy it. It was one of my worst subjects. But once I got started, so actually I moved to a small country town and I started with this organisation, Cerebral Palsy Alliance. And once I started to use it in real life and really meet children with cerebral palsy and other neurological disorders, it all started to make a lot more sense, and I really enjoyed it. And there's so much to know, and it's such a field that is changing very quickly, and it is a field that we're doing a lot of work to try and understand, both neurological physiotherapy and cerebral palsy. And that really drew me in because I could see that we were trying to make a difference in children's lives and people's lives, and that we were working very hard to best understand the way that interventions and the way I work in early diagnosis as well.
Yeah.
So I was working with a lot of people, and I could see the impact that was having on children's lives and families' lives when I worked with them. So that's why I was interested in this, and also, why parents every day would come to me and say, what can work best for my child, or what's happening with my child. And that really led me into the research work that I do now as well. Yeah. So that's how that happened for me.
It's a topic that I have discussed with Lourdes in the last chapter. She said me, just like you, it was like the parents come and ask me, they are working with my children, they are doing this, and do you think that is the better option? Do you think is there a better option? Do you think that the money is worth because it's a lot of money, most of the interventions. So I think that it's very interesting that Lourdes and you had the same explanation for me in two countries so far, and with ages of distance, no, Lourdes? It was like the same. It's very, very interesting.
I think it's money. It's also people's time and energy, and time that children can be playing with their friends and doing other things that are not therapy. It's children's lives and time and energy, as well as money, that is important. Yeah.
Tell us about the Cerebral Palsy Alliance, if you want, Anna, because here we don't know so much about this association, and what are you doing, what are your main lines of research, your next projects. I don't know if you have clinical work and research or only research. So tell us something about the Cerebral Palsy Alliance, because I think it's very interesting and we don't know a thing about it.
Yes. So thank you. Yes, Cerebral Palsy Alliance, it has been an organisation in Australia, and it's about 85 years old. And actually it was started by parents of a child with cerebral palsy who, she came onto the radio and she said, I'm a mother. I have this child. Is there anybody else out there like me? Please come. And so this was started, and it really is very core to our identity that we work with and are driven by parents and people with cerebral palsy. So it's an organisation. The main focus is really to deliver world-class services. So physiotherapy, occupational therapy, speech pathology. That's where I started work. But we also work in research. So I now work at the Research Institute at this organisation, and we aim to do world-class research primarily in cerebral palsy.
Wonderful.
But we also work as advocacy and working in policy change, so trying to make large change, not just to the therapist thinking, but on government level, to make difference in the lives of people with cerebral palsy.
Oh, great. And I want to ask you, what is the state of the art, like we said here, of pediatric physiotherapy in Australia? Because here in Spain, for example, there are no specialties in physiotherapy. We don't have neurological physical therapy or pediatric physiotherapy. Like you have your grade on physiotherapy, and then you take some training in degrees and post degrees formations. And I don't know, in Australia it's different or it's the same. Is there any specialty in physical therapy, or is like in Spain?
I think it sounds quite similar to me. So in Australia, obviously we study physiotherapy at university. The component of pediatric physiotherapy is very small. I had one small subject. And it's very dependent on which university you attend, similar to what Lourdes was saying before. It's dependent on what university you attend as to what orientation you have of your training. I studied at a place called the University of Sydney. It was very much a training in motor learning training, and many of the professors at my university did the early study in motor learning and motor training. So that was my training. But other universities do train differently. There are definitely so if you go to university and then we are dependent on the job learning. I learned from my job. Universities do some short courses in pediatrics. We also have an NDT Bobath Society in Australia, and they run, courses, I think, similar to around the world. I know NDT and Bobath is different in different places, but they have, extensive courses. So there are people in Australia who are trained in this method. And we also have, it's called the Australian Physiotherapy Association. I'm not sure, Lourdes, if it's similar to your Spanish Society of Pediatric Physiotherapy, but this is for all physiotherapists. And they have a small specialisation in pediatric physiotherapy. So they run courses as well. But yes, I think so at Cerebral Palsy Alliance, we have a training service, and that's very specific to cerebral palsy. So we're really dependent on some universities, but other organisations to train us, and our on the job training and specific courses in different types of interventions in that we get trained in.
It's the same in Spain. I ask you this because here, when you go out of the university, you are not a pediatric physical therapist, so you are a physical therapist, and then you go to buy the concepts, the methods, and Lourdes, for example, has a post-degree that is pediatrical and is like no methods, like one method, two methods, but the most frequent is that you, as a physical therapist in university, is like, okay, I'm now a physical therapist, and now I'm going to buy Bobath, Perfetti, Lemaitre, Brustrom, and it's like you're buying these concepts, trying to organize them in your approach and your point of view, and you have to work with them to put them in a way that makes sense for you, like a therapist, but it's not a formation that really has this kind of line of content. And I think that is the same in Australia. It depends on when, where do you study, but it's not like in medical schools, for example, that the specialties are more defined. We'll see, have you received training in any treatment method or concept, for example, like Bobath or NDT, that was the case of your meta-analysis? What is your opinion about these trainings, and when was the last time that you were in contact with these kinds of concepts as a student? I ask you this because, as we discuss later, one of the limitations that have been proposed for your study on the Pediatrics website is that your knowledge of NDT or contemporary NDT is not up to date. So I would like to know if you have been trained in these kind of concepts like NDT or Bobath, and when was the last time that you were a student in these methods?
Yeah, so as I was saying before, my university training was a lot in motor learning and motor training. We were given concepts at that time about understanding how NDT and how Bobath and how historically that works. So that was in my training some time ago. And I think as well in our clinical practice, we're still very much working with clinicians day to day about talking about how NDT works and how Bobath life works from day to day. So it's probably more from a clinical point of view and working with my colleagues that I have access with that. And, yes, so that's where my training's been. I have not done a full, Bobath course and NDT training course. I think partially that's also because when, I started in my work in, cerebral palsy and neurodevelopmental therapy, I've worked always at Cerebral Palsy Alliance, and our training was different and using some of the alternative methods that I'll talk about later on, that we found to be more effective than NDT. So my training has been in those methods too. So but we also understand that NDT and Bobath is very it's very usual and it's common and a lot of people use it. So it's obviously feasible and practical and people do use it. So we also want to understand, why, how to work out getting alternative approaches available to clinicians.
Yeah. I want to ask you, if in Australia you have this kind of image of the Bobath therapist or Perfetti therapist, because in Spain it's very common that when you have some training in these methods, like you don't want to say that you are a physical therapist, so you are a Bobath therapist, for example. And when you use your mark, you public in your website or in your social networks, what are you doing? What kind of approach are you using for your children with CP? It's very common that you don't say, okay, I'm a neurophysical therapist or I am a neurophysiotherapist. No, I am a Bobath therapist or a Perfetti therapist or I don't know, whatever. I don't know, in Australia it's the same. Is there this kind of identity with the concept? The people who study the concept or the method, talk about them in first person like a Bobath therapist or I don't know if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. I can understand exactly what you mean. I think in some instances, yes. Like I know that people, it's that there's very long and detailed training courses that people train in, as you talk about. So, and it takes a long time to train in this method. And so some people do say, I am Bobath trained, and they have listed that they've done this course, and that's a method. Perhaps it is in Australia a little bit less identity driven, but I do think probably, as I like to talk about later, but it's probably a little bit different than that, but that the methods that are used, so the hands-on facilitation, to put sensory input to try and guide the way a child moves, I think that is probably in a lot of clinicians' repertoire. So when they're trying to teach a child to sit, they may, hands go on to try and help the trunk become more stable. And rather than saying I'm a Bobath therapist necessarily, they are using these techniques to help train a child to learn how to sit. When we know that this, from the meta-analysis, there's other details about helping a child have their own movement and drive and control their own movement. We think is the way that works. So that I think is a bit different. I think some people do have that identity, and there's other types of training that use these concepts. So they do use that identity, but perhaps that's a little bit different in Australia, where I think that many therapists are using the techniques and concepts, but not necessarily as their identity as a therapist.
Yeah. I don't know if you know it, but here in Spain, we don't use NDT very much. I think often this term is used. And when we refer to this type of approaches, we use the term Bobath. So maybe you could tell us what is the difference between NDT and Bobath concept, because here and in your meta-analysis too, the terms are used interchangeably maybe. And I think that is one of the limitations that most of the authors have said about your work, is like, oh, this woman doesn't know what is NDT or Bobath, and it's like Bobath and NDT are the same thing. So here in Spain are the same thing. We were talking with Elena and Lourdes before, and we said like, you say here in Spain, I'm a NDT therapist, and most of people have a face like, I don't know what are you talking about, because NDT, I don't know what is neurodevelopmental therapy. And you say Bobath, and it's, Bobath, of course. Bobath is, I studied at the university, and then I do the training, and because, here in Spain, NDT and Bobath Concept are quite the same. So I don't know if in Australia it's not the same, or...
Yeah, so I think it's interesting in Australia. I know our society is the NDT and Bobath Society. My understanding is that across the world there are different iterations of this. So in the USA, for example, NDT is the more common type of therapy. In the UK, Bobath, and now I'm learning that in Spain, Bobath is the more common type of therapy. I guess again, when we think back to the way we looked at this in the meta-analysis, and the reason we've, I guess, put you can see it does, we've put them together there, and it can seem like we're testing different ideas. But again, essentially it's testing similar each time we look at definitions, even in the Australian definition, or we use like an adult definition of Bobath and NDT. I think it still comes back to these essentially similar ingredients of the way these therapies are being used. So it doesn't matter which definition we looked at, still it had these essential elements of it's an interaction between the therapist with hands-on facilitation to help. So that's the first part, and then trying to normalize movement. So those, I think, are the similar elements as the way that we're understanding that. And that can be together as a limitation on this paper. But as we see, we were trying to do a broad-ranging review to understand how these concepts work. Yeah.
Okay. Elena, Lourdes, I don't know if you want to say something, because I think that we have to pass to the meta-analysis analysis. We'll say that. I think that this block with the concept, Australia, Spain, and I don't know if you want to say something, or I don't know if in Glasgow is the same, Elena, or... is it familiar to you what Anna is saying? Because it's quite the same all around the world with this concept and this kind of work, no?
I think it's quite amazing to think how global this concept has gone through the years. And actually, as she was saying, in UK is quite known, and you actually have, so you have, like, in the whole UK, you've got the Bobath Center in London, who they're the core of Bobath in UK. But then also in Scotland, they have what it was called Bobath Scotland, that actually in 2020, I think it was, they changed to Cerebral Palsy Scotland, because they just did like kind of a refresh of the brand and everything, but they actually made very clear in their website that all the therapists are Bobath, and you actually if you work there, they will train you if you're not trained in Bobath and all that stuff. So I think it's quite popular. I actually see myself at work, which then I might comment a bit more later, but the fact that it's quite I think the general idea of facilitating, right, that it's known that they need to have more active movement, but also, and because I work with severe affected children and teenagers who don't have much of active movement themselves and interaction with environment, it's like this big tendency, right, to try and help them with the posture, and help them with, especially when it comes to manipulation, upper limbs and all that stuff. You can actually see when doing the hip surveillance forms, we've got an entire form with all the measurements, but then also saying what kind of therapies they follow. And you've got the options are like active and passive stretching, strength training, and neurodevelopmental therapy. So you actually say what kind of therapy the kid is following, as well as like leisure activities and that stuff. So I think it's quite known. Yeah, it's like a basic, right? Like it would be.
It's like the basics there.
Yeah.
Okay. Anna, if you have to pick one, what were the main conclusions of the study for you, of this meta-analysis? I know that there are a lot of conclusions, and we love your conclusions. We are in love with you, but you are the author. If you have to pick one, what were the main conclusions of your work?
Yes, so we had, I guess, 3 main results to pull out, and we made 2 recommendations. So just to do a bit of context about how we found these results and made the recommendations. So we looked for the studies. We looked at randomized controlled trials, which are the highest level of evidence we can find when looking for how interventions work. And then we looked at how good the quality of the evidence was, and then how effective different interventions were. And then we used a process called GRADE. So this is where you look at how effective an intervention is, how good the quality of the evidence is, but you also ask a lot of other questions that are relevant, like how much does the intervention cost? Is it do parents of children with cerebral palsy, are they concerned about movement interventions? Is it feasible? So there's a lot of other questions. So this is the way that we pull these results together. But the 3 main findings. The first one was that we found there was no difference between NDT and Bobath together, and no intervention. So there was no difference between those 2. Secondly, we found that these, what we call activity-based interventions were more effective than NDT and Bobath for improving motor outcomes, so movement outcomes in children. And the third main finding was that there was no difference between a high dose of NDT and Bobath and a lower dose of NDT and Bobath. So together, using that process I spoke about before, we had a team of people and we made 2 recommendations. So they were a strong recommendation that we should use activity-based interventions in preference of NDT to improve movement or motor outcomes in cerebral palsy. And the second was a strong recommendation against the use of NDT at any dose to improve motor function.
Oof, Anna, I don't know if you're aware of the revolution that this conclusion represents here in Spain. I'm listening to you and I have goosebumps, like, because when I studied 15 years ago at university, Bobath Concept was like a synonym of neurophysical therapy in CP. So, listen to you is like a total revolution. And I think that, you have, like the, approach of, say these three big conclusions, that the huge clinical implications that these conclusions have here in Spain, for example, I don't know if in Australia too, but here in Spain, these 3 conclusions could be the most revolutionary, and I'm not trying to be, it's like, honestly, the most revolutionary change in the way that we understand the physical therapy in CP. Because here in Spain, Bobath Concept is the most frequent approach. And when we talk about this approach, I'm not speaking about this new approach. I'm speaking about facilitation, inhibition and like don't do something wrong and trying to be straight and try to and work with my hands because my hands have the power to change your reflex and this kind of stuff. So when I listen to you say these conclusions as clear as you do, I think that is wonderful. So thank you very much because I have a problem with this NDT approach when I study, and it was like because I work as you while I was studying, so it was like this is not working with my patients, and maybe this is the best approach, the most famous approach. Maybe if you don't have this training, they won't hire you in anything, but I see that this approach isn't useful with my patients. So I think that is very, very revolutionary, and I think that I thank you very much is the only thing that I could say, because it's like I feel free, like something have done a meta-analysis saying that what we were suspecting. So, Lourdes, I think that you raised your hand. Have you something to say?
Yes, we respect the Bobath therapies that say, no, we have updated our concept, and we have introduced some therapeutic strategies that we never knew that it depends on Bobath theory. And what do you think to use different therapeutic strategies and to put in this name? Mm-hmm. Because, we use the International Classification of Functioning, we talk about participation, we talk with all of data, but there is not Bobath, there is not principle of the basic theoretical basis of Bobath that does not include the international classification. There is not include some strategies that nowadays at news, and they get some strategies they want. And there is a lot of Bobath, different kinds of Bobath therapists. What do you think about?
Yes, I think firstly, Juan, to your point, I think I do. I mean, I probably don't understand the breadth of it, but I do understand that it's a very big, and for some people a very new idea, that to just stop what they have been trained in and what they have spent their clinical lives doing, but also on a day-to-day basis you're doing a therapy and it might seem like it works, so that can be very hard to say, whoa, we'll just have to stop that. So that can be confronting, and we're hoping in our process that we've tried to take a very unbiased view. There are biases in everything, but we've tried to do every process we could to be as unbiased as we could, to take the highest level of evidence and to pull that together to make these recommendations. Yeah. So it was a very considered, it took a lot of work and a lot of our clinical thinking, but we hope that we've given an unbiased view in making these recommendations with that. But Lourdes, I think to your point as well, even in this meta-analysis, there's a very big table in the middle, and we pulled out all of the elements of each of the interventions we looked at. Some were from passive stretching. There were elements that in the NDT or the Bobath interventions, there were definitely, in lots of them, had lots of active components, trying to do sit to stand and training and walking and gait training. Some had parent coaching. These are all elements that we understand from a neuroplastic point of view do help to improve motor function. So yes, I think that all, as therapists, we are all trying to move forward and get the best elements we can and do the best for our clients. That's what everybody's trying to do here. And again, I think it comes back to, we talk about this all the time in our team with therapists we're working with. What's the actual essential elements that we're talking about that are different? in this meta-analysis, it showed that this was different. And when we looked at all of these papers, that essential elements that were different between them were this hands-on facilitation, the idea that it's a sensory input that helps to drive the neurological system to make a difference in movement, and that we're trying to normalize movement. So if movement does not look typical, the aim is to try and make it look more typical, and that would help. And the difference between that and all the activity-based interventions that we compared it to, they took what we understand as this more, it's an approach that helps with neuroplasticity of the brain. So that is the element where the child is driving the movement. So it isn't a therapist hands-on trying to make the movement. It is the child generating the movement, controlling the movement, and doing the repetition, doing variability, and it does not matter about the quality of the movement. So, I think of an example of, a child who their goal is trying to walk faster or further. So I think in an activity-based approach, we have evidence behind being able to practice walking, overground walking, treadmill training. It's all this repetition in varied environments that we might use electrical stimulation if the child has a problem with dorsiflexion. Electrical stimulation has some evidence, but we would not have a therapist have hands-on to try and help drive that movement. We would not have trying to, place dorsiflexion of the foot or try and place where the foot would go. It doesn't matter where the foot lands. It's more the repetition and the variation that we do this. Or I think of an example of a baby trying to learn to sit. I do a lot with learning. You may, again, you would practice sitting, practice and repetition in different places in the house to do variation. You may have a therapist or a parent have their hands on the child to stop them falling over. You would have it on there so they can practice sitting many, many times. But as soon as the child can try it, the hands come off. And we are not, if the child, is bent over, we're not putting our hands on to try and make the child sit up. But we are trying to practice again and again to get strength of the trunk, and the child is generating that movement. But it doesn't matter if the trunk does not look normal or typical. It is, you keep practicing it, no matter how it looks, you keep practicing it till the skill is learnt. It's a very long answer to your question, but I think it comes back to Lourdes' point of, different Bobath societies and different definitions. They have moved on, and they have brought on activity. They have brought in coaching. They've brought in goal setting. That's excellent. That's exactly the things that we want people to be using, because there's strong evidence that they work. The elements we think that produced the outcomes in this meta-analysis, which was that activity-based interventions are more effective than NDT. The essential elements we think are hands-on facilitation and normalization of movement. And if those elements, those I think are the elements that are different, no matter who's bringing it, who's doing it. So, yes.
Great.
Sorry, I mean because some Bobath therapy or centers of Bobath use the treadmill, and for example, the treadmill say that now is Bobath, but it's not Bobath.
Yes. And I think it's difficult, and it's this discussion of the concepts and the definitions, and that has been a discussion ongoing a long time. I think essentially, if it's the elements that improve neuroplasticity and improve the outcomes of the children, then that's a good thing. So yes, I agree with you. It's using other elements that other people have used and calling that Bobath. And that's why we keep coming back to trying to understand what the essential elements that are different in what's effective and what is not effective, no matter what it's called. Yeah.
Because it confuses the young generations of physiotherapists, and they say, what is really Bobath? understand finally that this is the reason.
Yeah, I think that's right. But essentially, if we can understand the ideas of the elements of different interventions that are effective and why we're doing that, then that should hope lead to better outcomes for children with cerebral palsy, which in the end is what we all want. Yeah.
Okay, Anna, if you want, we can pass to the limitations of your meta-analysis that some author have said, because I don't know if you have take a look to the clock, but that you are busy and we don't want to take you here like, Anna's hours. So we can speak about the limitations, because I think that we are in agreement with you. We are in agreement with you and your conclusions, but there are a lot of criticism about some points of your work. So you're here and you are the main author of the meta-analysis. So I would like to ask you about, for example, that some authors have criticized that the meta-analysis, because according to them, it covers like too much decades of publications of 2 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that it was like 1973 or 2020, a lot of time. What would you like to say about this criticism, and why had you to take this long time for your research?
Yes, thank you. So that's right. It was the papers spanned many decades, and so there were a few reasons behind this. Part of this paper was a response to a criticism in the literature that people would say that there is not enough evidence to understand if Bobath or NDT was effective, that there wasn't actually enough research to answer this question. So we decided to look at all evidence over all time about NDT and Bobath. We definitely understand that parts of the concept have moved on, and that the research methods have moved on over that time. That's a very fair criticism. But we decided to take the highest quality evidence that we could of all any intervention that had been tested between NDT and another intervention, or NDT and no intervention. So we didn't put any limits on the years. So that's why there was over such a long span. We had a quick look, and there were 15 of the papers were before the year 2000, and 20 were before the after the year 2000. Yeah. But I think probably more importantly than this, we did a quality analysis, as you do in systematic reviews, and we judged the quality of all of those papers equally. So that came into the recommendations, understanding what the quality of all of that evidence was. There's no doubt that some of the older papers had poorer quality than some of the later papers, but that's not always true. So you don't want to miss a good or a poor quality paper from later. So that's why we thought it was important to include all of these. And when we looked at the quality of those papers came into that judgment and into that grade process that I was talking about to help make those recommendations. So I think it matters less the time that the papers were done, but more that we use the quality to understand how to make those judgments. Yeah.
And Anna, other authors have said that NDT, that is a criticism that I can't understand. I don't know if you can, but NDT is like a type of treatment philosophy or a school of thought or something like that, but not a treatment, and therefore cannot be subjected to scientific study. What is your opinion on these topics? Because it's like, okay, Bobath Concept is not a treatment, is not a method, so you cannot do a meta-analysis because it's like a philosophy or school of treatment or something like that. But do you think that this is real?
I think that I'm trained as a scientist, and this is an evidence-based practice is the way that I that I see the world that I do as an applied scientist. But I think that I think that we probably can agree that that we can and that we should objectively test any healthcare practice that we do to really understand what the outcome's going to be for people. Mm-hmm. So I think that you know we can do that as methods, and I think that we should.
Yeah. However, and this is a strange thing, there are a lot of scientific studies published in many cases by the concept's own trainers. So this is like, no, this is a school of philosophy, a school of thought. But when you try to say that our method doesn't work, but when it's time to say that, yes, the concept is great. We have a lot of production, but, when you, I don't know how to say it properly, but when you try to do a revision or review of these papers that are published in many cases in the NDT interviews or research, do you think that these scientific studies that are published with the concepts on trainers have the methodological quality of the studies of your meta-analysis, or you have to take a long time because the methodological quality was poor, and you have to look for a lot and try to decide to pick the studies that are correct? Because I've read a lot of criticisms no, there are lots of studies saying that Bobath Concept is great. And in this meta-analysis, you only pick the studies that say that it's not better than placebo. And so where are the studies that prove the effectiveness of this concept? Because when you go to a congress, when you go to the university and try to teach the students, they say that, no, I was last week in a training of the Bobath Concept, for example, and they say that it has a lot of evidence of, so where are these works? Where are these papers can prove the effectiveness of this contemporary approach?
Yeah, I think this isn't just a problem for NDT or physiotherapy. For busy clinicians who are seeing clients every day, it's hard work to stay on top of the newest research. The amount of literature that's come out in cerebral palsy has gone exponentially in the last little while. So being able to read everything and make sense of it is difficult. I've just spent a degree learning how to do that. But so we need to make sure that we help clinicians along with this. And this podcast is an excellent way to do that. But I think that a part of this process is trying to take all of the bias that we can out of these judgments. So that's why we went ahead and we chose only randomized controlled trials. Using randomized controlled trials, they're hard to run and they're hard to do. I'm a part of them. They're expensive. They're not easy to run, but they take out all as much bias as you can when testing an intervention. So that's why we chose only randomized controlled trials. Sometimes there's no randomized controlled trials and you have to go to another type of evidence. But we found in this question, we had 35 randomized controlled trials. That's a lot of randomized controlled trials for cerebral palsy. And then the reason we chose a meta-analysis, so that's where you get the results of many randomized controlled trials and you use a mathematical method to put them together. And you're trying to understand if all of the answers from those research trials are going in the same direction or not. If they're going in different directions, you come out saying something doesn't work. But if they all start to go in the same direction, you can be more and more confident that it's true. And in cerebral palsy, it's hard to run research studies. They're often very small. So in a meta-analysis, you can get bigger numbers. So again, you can be more confident that the mathematical answer is true. But that is why we chose to look at only randomized controlled trials and to do a meta-analysis to try and answer this question. So I'm very sure that there is a lot of other research available that answers this, but and it can be hard to read those and interpret those. But this is why in our paper we chose to use only randomized controlled trials. I spent a very long time reading many studies to see if they met what we chose which criteria to put in. And so the answer is to make it as truthful as we could, and for clinicians to be as confident as they can in the answers that we found. So that, I think, that's saying what I did, but also that's why we didn't include these other papers, because they didn't meet, the level that we wanted in this paper.
Anna, and what have you to say about the because the NDT Association, that I think that is a little upset with your work, has said that you use data from diverse populations ranging from infants with CP to adults post-stroke. And is this true? What would you like to say about that? Because I've read the meta-analysis, and I don't have this idea. So, is this true? Is there a limitation for the study?
I think that we've got to answer this. So I guess for starters, there was only children with cerebral palsy in the meta-analysis. We only included children that had cerebral palsy. We did include from infants up to 18 years of age. So yes, that's a very broad range. And we included all types of cerebral palsy. So we know, Elena's talking about children who GMSCS 4 and 5, so using, high-end wheelchairs to need to move around, to children who can run and walk and skip. So that's a very diverse population to put in one meta-analysis. We didn't include adults with stroke. We did, I'm not sure if this was the meaning, but we did in our discussion compare that the results from our meta-analysis are starting to mirror the results that we're seeing in adult stroke, in acquired brain injury. And so that gives us more confidence that children and adults with other neurological disorders, we're starting to see the same effects in those populations as we are in cerebral palsy. So those people were not included in our meta-analysis, but that is where we referred to. And so back to the point about it's a relatively diverse range of children, but again, in a meta-analysis, you want to understand what the trends are doing. And as we pulled all of this together, we found that all the trends were towards that NDT or Bobath was not as effective as these alternative treatments, which we have available and we can do them. And so, that's why we made those conclusions.
Yeah. So the last thing that I want to discuss with you is that some authors have stated maybe that, and literally, I have to read it because it's literally the implementation of Bobath risk losing vital clinical reasoning skills and clinical reasoning training for therapists. What do you think about that, about this risk? Do you think that the implementation of Bobath Concept is like we are losing our identity or our ability to speak with other therapies? I think that is like
I think that in allied health, so as physiotherapists, we're all using clinical reasoning skills all the time. It's what we're taught to do. It's what we're trained in, and we're using it every single day. I think so. Clinical reasoning, it's this process where we assess people, we make judgments about what interventions we want to offer and apply to people. So I think that all clinicians are doing that all the time. clinical reasoning skills, they're not specific to Bobath, they're not specific to NDT, but I see that I think perhaps what they're saying is that we will lose the clinical reasoning skills that are taught and applied through NDT and Bobath. So I think what we could say is that, I really hope that this paper can add to people's clinical reasoning skills on what to choose as a paper. So I think that we can continue all to use our clinical reasoning skills in that way.
Because it's like some Game of Thrones thing, like if I die, you will die with me. Something like that, no? Okay, Anna, the last question that I have, do you think that the conclusions of your meta-analysis can be extrapolated to other treatment concepts? I mean, based on structural treatment, correction, repetition of this kind of normal movement patterns, manual manipulation by the therapist without exploration of the environment by the child. Do you think that we have to do a specific meta-analysis for each concept or each method? Or do you think that with all that you have read, with all your knowledge, with all your work, can we extrapolate these conclusions to other concepts or other ways to, or we have to do 100 meta-analysis of all the concepts?
It's the same, and this is again why we all use our clinical reasoning skills, because you can't necessarily, so first of all, I would say if somebody wants to prove that a certain intervention works, then yes, we do need to test them. But it's difficult to test every single concept, which is why we see the point that we're in. I do think that if someone comes up with a certain type of intervention and they want to see if it works, it should be tested. But I think many times in this podcast we've spoken about this is very similar to different definitions of Bobath and NDT. I think that it comes back to these essential elements of the hands-on facilitation, trying to normalize movement. If we use the concepts of neuroplastic approach, so they are if you are repeatedly practicing, the child is controlling and generating the movement. It's in varied environments. It's motivated by the child. These are the elements that we're finding help improve motor outcomes. So my clinical reasoning would say to me that any other named intervention that is, has similar hands-on facilitation approach and normalizing movement, I think that they will not be as effective as approaches where we're using these just motor learning neuroplastic approaches. That's what my clinical reasoning would tell me. But
repetition is not learning if the child is not exploring the environment and doing an active work
generating their own movement, their own control, not somebody else generating the movement and control.
Practice, and if you want walk, do walk.
That's exactly right.
Okay, Lourdes, I think that you raised your hand. I know that we have the time is running out. I don't want Anna to give, we could spend hours with you because I think that all that you say is very interesting, but maybe if you want, I would like, one last round of interventions in which you can speak freely about some point that you think is important and maybe we have forgotten to say. So, okay. Be free to ask Anna. We have like 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
I want to give a question. Well, two. One, do you have any policy in your country to implement NDT? Because in Sweden, we know that this therapy is no longer policy funded and they have succeeded. And the other question is have you had Bobath physiotherapists get angry with you because of the meta-analysis?
So I think in answer to your first question, we don't currently have government policies not funding NDT or Bobath, and that is one of the reasons, we discuss this in this paper. And, part of our organisation is to go to government and policy level to discuss this. So, in Australia, some people do pay for their own therapies, but a lot of it is under a government-funded insurance scheme. So that is a part of our work to do that. And we know that there is this de-implementation science. So it's not just up to clinicians to say, I'm going to change. That's a part of it, but another big part of it is making sure that these types of therapies are not funded. And I think really importantly, NDT and Bobath across the world have done very amazing and big training sessions. So that's why people have something to go to and be trained in. And so we really importantly need to make sure we have good training, available training and funded training in these alternative policies, because people can't just stop tomorrow if they can't get trained in what the alternatives are. So I think that's a big policy issue that needs to be funded. And in answer to your second question, I think this is a debate that's been happening actually for a long time. People I've worked with have been discussing this over the last decade. I think to begin with, people felt quite upset about it to begin with. In my process of having done this again, I think people have been receptive. I think you can see that there's still some debate in the literature about just wanting to make sure that that this is true. But people have been very receptive. I think, we now have quite good evidence about this, but also people can start to really understand with our new thoughts of neuroplasticity and how the brain works. It makes sense. So people have, been very receptive and open as you have, today. But yes, a lot of people are wanting to read this and understand it, and we've provided the evidence, but it's also our job to keep going with these other ideas of how to help young clinicians or clinicians who've been using this for a very long time to provide alternatives. Because the alternatives are there, we need to help get them into practice, and that's what ultimately will make the difference for the child with cerebral palsy, which is the whole point of all of this. Yeah.
Well, is there any question? Because we have 2 minutes. Well, Lourdes, Anna, I've really enjoyed your company and I think that it has been very interesting. And as I said in the previous chapter, I hope this is not the last time you come here. As we say here in Spain, this is your home. We are delighted that you visit us whenever you want. And I hope the time is flying. I think that it was like when Anna says 40 minutes, 45 minutes was like, oh, a lot, because it's the first time where we are speaking in English with an author and it's like, oh, 40 minutes. And now we are running like, this woman has to run. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd really like to say thank you. And also I'd like to say, podcasts like this is a really essential way to be able to discuss this and help clinicians to understand and make a difference. So this is a really essential element. What I've written in the paper is very detailed and sometimes hard to understand, but this is an excellent way for people to understand what we're trying to do and what the evidence is telling us. So thank you so much for your work.
Thank you. And it has been a huge pleasure and a honor to be able to talk with you about your work. And I hope this is not the last time that we meet. If you ever come to Spain, let us know, because we will surely come to see you and give you a hug or
fabulous. I love that.
Yeah.
To come and meet with you.
Drink something. As I said, it has been my first time in an interview in English, and I think honestly, it could not have been with anyone better than you, because you were great. And this was a pleasure for me. And I think that all that you say, it's, I don't know what, my friends, think, but I'm delighted with you and your work. And thank you very much for being here. So if you want, we can end the episode. Dear listeners, see you in the next episode of Neurophysic Club next year, I suppose. I wish you happy holidays and a wonderful new year. And as I always say, may the movement be with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
goodbye.
Anna. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Neuroconciencia, del caos a la sinergia.